What's so interesting is number one is still ChatGPT. We have Gemini, but where are we starting to see, just if we're thinking about the consumer and consumer-focused apps, Claude coming in, and how are we seeing people using different chatbots?
Yeah, absolutely. There were a lot of, this was actually the most fun and exciting report to do out of the 6 we've done, because there were a lot of changes. First, as you mentioned, we did add for the first time companies that are not AI native, but are significantly AI enhanced. So Notion, as an example, they reported that 50% of their ARR is now coming from AI features. Canva's another one, FreePick, Grammarly. Then beyond that, I think the other really interesting trend in this edition of the list is just the continued battle between ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini for the mainstream consumer. Right. And we've seen some pretty significant changes there over the last couple months.
What sparks the change, other than press and coverage of what's happening with the Pentagon? Is it that a model comes out and eclipses it? People are actually using these things, they're working out which one is better than the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for a while we saw consumers were using one generative AI product, if that even. And now they're multi-tenanting across products, but for different use cases. So Gemini, if you look at their user growth, it's basically perfectly correlated to the release of like Nano Banana, VO3, all of these new creative models. Where Claude is really starting to shine, I think, is in the prosumer and work tools. So Claude Code, of course, had a crazy ramp to $1 billion in ARR. Claude Cowork is now their product for consumers that's being picked up pretty quickly. They also put Claude in Excel, in Google Sheets. Probably the best way to understand this is both Claude and ChatGPT now have their own app stores. They each have more than 200 apps that they offer access to, but there's only 11% overlap between them. ChatGPT is leaning in on the mainstream consumer, like fashion, shopping, travel, transportation. Sam Altman has said he wants ChatGPT to be for everyone. Claude is leaning in on like deep premium data sets for scientific work, medical work, data analysis. And so I think we're seeing them go in slightly different directions in terms of the audience they're trying to win.
Team, let's bring back up the top 100 ranking and then focus in on, I guess, the top 5, 10. I find this, Olivia, so interesting that DeepSeek is so high up. Maybe through explaining the methodology of how you put the ranking together. Like some of these names, you kind of touched on it there, but you'd more associate them with enterprise. You'd associate their use outside of the United States, potentially. What are you seeing in the data?
Yeah, DeepSeek is a fascinating one because it was actually higher on prior versions of the list and has dropped down. What basically is happening with DeepSeek on a country-by-country basis is that China and Russia are blocked from using many of the Western AI tools. So China is heavily DeepSeek. It's their #1 product. Then something like a Daobao from ByteDance, something like a Kimi. And Russia is the #2 market for DeepSeek. It has fallen off a cliff in terms of usage in the US, I think it's fair to say. And I actually think that goes back to the question about what's going to happen with Claude. Because what we saw with DeepSeek in the US was all press was good press, even if it was bad press, just because people didn't know about the product. And I think the same thing happened with Claude in the past week, in that a couple months ago, market awareness of Claude amongst US consumers was maybe 2%. And so now they're topping the App Store just because many people have never heard of the product and they're downloading it for the first time. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to retain those users, or if, like DeepSeek, they will only keep users in countries that can't access other products.